Hey, welcome to my channel. This is Watercolor with Abhishek. Today we are going to learn, yes, you're right, foliage. Now what exactly foliage is distant items which look collectively one, but not exactly they are one. They are individually standing there, especially the trees near the mountains or in front of the mountains or at the bottom of a huge mountain range, especially, or basically anything which is at a distance and they're not quite clear. So let's start the painting process. As you can see, the drawing is already ready. I have already finished this mountain range. I just marked the horizon lines and the water body. I'm also going to introduce a little bit of land bodies. So, okay, in terms of color, I'll be using mostly cobalt blue, crimson red, viridian green, yellow, and colors like that. Okay, alright, so I'm just going to dilute the colors. I'm going to neutralize it. I'm not going to use quite bluish or reddish color in the same time. So it'll look slightly purplish, but once the paper is quite dried up, things will look quite bright and light. I'm trying to depict a morning scene, not exactly dawn or not exactly like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. It's more of 7 or 8 in the morning. The sun is just getting ready to spread across, stuff like that. Okay, this is wet on wet. What I'm going to do right now, as you can see, the mountain is basically quite wet. And now let me introduce a little bit of gradation for the mountain. I'll be using mostly purplish, but slightly darker and muted. As you can see, I'm using a little bit of green also in it. So color is not exactly purple, but it's slightly muted. Look at that. Nice and easy. Glide your fingers. Believe in your brush strokes. That's what I say. And I think it's a good way to achieve a desired item if you try not to overdo it. Let's proceed. So as I come down, I'll try to make it slightly warmer. Why? Because the colors are going to be quite greenish in terms of the structure of the trees, the distant trees that we are able to see, maybe slightly, but they're there definitely. So we are going to introduce green. So the color is not exactly viridian because it looks a little bit towards the sap green family, but that's totally fine because it's muted and it's getting on the paper, which is basically wet. So more of wet and wet technique. What will happen is when the paper is quite dry, the colors will also fade. Now, trying to make a little bit of neutral tint, but still in the family of green. As you can see, it's slightly darker than the previous layer, and I'm going to add it over here, just at the bottom. So I'll have wet on wet 2 layers of individual trees which basically look one collectively. There we go. Brilliant mixes. This is immediately black on green, so sometimes people don't use black at all. Even I don't use, but for the purpose of a demo, that's totally okay because I don't want the paper to dry up entirely. There we go. If you notice, we have distant mountains. We also have distant trees in 2 segments. Obviously, they will get blended and we might not even see the difference, but that's fine. This is experimental. So when you try to do something like this, you actually do not have a 100% idea that this is how it is going to look, exactly how your brain is thinking. Oh my God, that's such a big sentence I just said, but that's okay. You get the idea. It's really hard. So experiment, you might see similar colors which you are really thinking to get. Sometimes it might not work. So when you practice, automatically, practice will help you and things will get better. So now look at the water body. That's slightly yellow ochreish, I'll say, because it's actually getting mixed up with green also, and I also introduced a little bit of vermilion red in it. So now as I come down, I'll try to make the water body a little cooler than the horizon line. Always remember, at the horizon line, the water body should look lighter, and as it comes down towards the foreground, the colors will be slightly darker, and if it requires, also cooler. So I'll be using a little bit of blue there. So this is the middle ground area of the water body only. So this is going to be slightly dull and bluish. As you see, it's getting mixed up with ochre and vermilion red, so it's trying to create this greenish shade, but not entirely green or not entirely blue. So it's somewhere in the middle, as you can see. Now this depends on the perception of how you actually look at it. If you think it's greenish, yeah, it is, because the tree green is actually having the reflections on the water body. Also, the water body might be greenish, but even though they have all these shades, individual perception actually matters, the way everybody looks at things. So as you can see, and the bottom area is quite cool. Okay, I made the paper dry up entirely, not exactly entirely, probably around 70%, so I can lift all these areas I can see. As you can see, try to use a synthetic brush, not squirrel hair or any natural hair brushes. Synthetic will work just fine. All you have to do, squeeze out the excess water body, water in the brush, and make it a pointy tip and try to lift. So that's the lifting technique. I'm just trying to get enough highlights so it can be suggested that they are tree trunks. And in fact, I'm not going to do a lot of details because that's unnecessary, and those trees are quite far, so all you can see might be the leaves and the trunk because of lighting. So it's a morning scene, as you can see, and now let's just mix this color. So I'll explain what exactly I'm going to do now. This is more of brown. This is an experimental land that I'm trying to do. Wait, let me tell you something. This painting that I'm doing, it's actually, I'm not using any reference for this. This is quite imaginary. All I did was a reference drawing before I started painting. So the colors are actually live that I'm trying to achieve. So it might be right, it might not be right, but I'll see. You know what? That's okay. Let's just dilute this a little bit. Nice. So now it looks like the light is falling on the top of the land. So only the area which is touching the water, that's slightly darker. The edge, maybe I'll just have a little bit of reflection here. Now always remember, if you have to fix something like this, you better do it while it's wet. And if it is totally dried up, then it will be tough to actually erase. What you can do, you can actually add colors on top. If that's something which will solve your situation, depending upon what exactly happened, that might be helpful. But as of now, if you have anything which you think, these are actually big mistakes, try to fix them while it is wet. That's my advice. Let's see. This is the second water body, and the difference is the first one was slightly wet on dry, and this one is wet on semi-dry. You can say not exactly wet 100%, but semi-dry. So if you can notice, the colors are actually blending with each other. All right, let's move on. These are the small grassy structures that I'm trying to do over there, and also some of the reflections down under. And there I can introduce, I'm thinking actually, is this green fine? Let's try and see. Obviously this area will be slightly darker than the previous land. Just like this, quite a bit of straight grasses. They're not really important, but they'll give a little bit of accent and dimension to your painting in terms of layers and distance. So perspective comes in handy. And these are some of the darker areas. You know what? Maybe I can actually add some leaves, like lily leaves, but I'll try not to keep them in quite realistic. I'll try to keep them suggestive. So, yeah, that's a good idea. Let the paper dry up. Now let me explain. In your landscape painting, let that be watercolor, oil, sketching, or whatever medium that you're using, please keep that in mind that if the background and the foreground are not differentiated individually but one as collectively, then things will not look in your paint. Things will not look nice in your painting. So if the background is quite dark and the foreground is quite light, that doesn't make sense. So you have to keep the background slightly lighter than the foreground. So the foliage that you're trying to achieve, you cannot make them absolutely blackish. You know what? That's not like a rule, but that's something you should observe when you try to do realistic painting. Keep that in mind and give it a go and see how things look. Try to go outside and try to do open air painting, and you'll try to actually learn a lot of things if you try to do outside, besides the studio work or practices. You can just go outside somewhere far away, I don't know, nearby your house or nearby your country land, riverside, the sea, wherever you are. Try to go out there and try to paint. A beautiful feeling, by the way. Alright, let's move on. As you can see, I'm thinking of adding leaves right now. I'm just waiting for the paper to dry up a little and I'm blabbering in the meantime. So yeah, quite good actually. Notice the water body, lighter at the horizon and darker at the foreground, right? Now, I think the paper is quite ready. Let's move on to the next part. Okay, so the first land will also have some leaves. So I'm not going to do individually a lot, but they'll also look collectively like, like it'll look like a set of leaves just floating around. It's not exactly each like one by one you're trying to do. So totally okay. There we go. It's more than enough for me. Yeah, that looks good. So we have to introduce two-tone techniques over here. Pay attention. One, the first coat of the leaf, the first color, whichever you introduce, and another one which will be the darker area of the leaf, just to show that there is a dark area and it's floating on the water. So there should be another color in the middle of the water body color and the leaves actual color. So you just go for a darker shade and try to outline it very lightly so we can see the difference. Two-tonal values to make a thing appear realistic rather than an actual leaf. So there we go. I'll show you what exactly I mean by that. Let me just introduce a couple of more leaves over here, some ground structure. Okay, now it's time. Okay, I'm going to add a lot of grasses, and also I'm going to show you the two-tone contours basically that I'm going to do. Now, wait a minute. Let me just add some of the grasses here. Take a look. This is what I'm saying. Only one side or the bottom of each and every leaf that you would like to show individually or collectively. There we go. So that will show like it's actually floating on water and it's a 3D object. So that's what you should keep in your mind, I'm adding a touch of lemon yellow just to bring some color basically on the leaves, not exactly greenish, but it'll appear greenish by getting mixed with the darker shade I made earlier. There we go. There we go. So as you notice, things are actually looking better. The painting is basically finished. I don't have to do much. I'm just trying to add some more dimension by adding reflections and a little bit of grassy structure over here. So I can have a pretty light background, middle ground, and the foreground is slightly darker than others. It's time to finish it by signing it. Okay, that's done. Thank you very much for watching it. I hope you learned something, and I'll definitely see you in my further videos. Thank you so much. Take care.